So yeah, so today we're going to look at carrying on with biological molecules topic. I'm going to start off with water. We're also going to look at inorganic ions and ATP. So they're the three last, I'm sure they're the three last, yeah they are. They're the three last biological molecules that we'll look at for this topic, and that's the end of topic one. Topic one's all these different biological molecules. So these are the last three that we'll look at. And then we'll go on to look at cells instead. So water. The main things that you need to know about water is actually the structure of water and how its structure influences its properties and importance for living organisms. So water, our bodies are made up of 60 to 70% water, and water is really, really important. So before actually I go through the structure of water, I'm just going to talk through a little bit about water and what water can be used for. So 60 to 70% of the human body is composed of water, and water is used for a huge different range of things in our body. So one of the ways it's used is it's a reactant in our cells. So for example, in plants, water is a reactant in photosynthesis. In our bodies and also in plants, it's a reactant in hydrolysis. So all those hydrolysis reactions, when we've been joining monomers together to make polymers, hydrolysis is required for that, which means water is required. So it starts to give us an idea of why our body's made up of so much water. Water also provides a structural support for our cells, and it keeps organisms cool to maintain that optimum body temperature. So it has a lot of different roles. So generally its properties are that it's got a metabolic importance, which goes down to its ideas of it being a reactant in our cells. It's got high heat capacity, has a high heat of vaporization, has cohesive particles, and it's useful as a solvent. So what we're first going to look into is actually the structure of water, what it's made up of and how it works. So water. Water is made up of two atoms of hydrogen, and those two atoms of hydrogen are covalently bonded to a molecule of oxygen. So you should remember from GCSE chemistry, covalent bonding is that sharing of electrons between the two atoms. So it is a polar molecule, and polar molecules are basically when electrons are not evenly distributed across the molecule. So, and this often occurs during covalent bonding. So what we end up with is our hydrogen atoms are actually slightly positive because we have more we don't have more electrons, we have less electrons around our hydrogen areas, and our oxygen is slightly negative. So we have this polarity. So, and because of this polarity, we get this basically, some people call it like a Mickey Mouse shape. So we've got the two ears and the main face of Mickey Mouse being formed for water. And because of this polarity, we have, and the bonds that are formed, we have this shape being formed. So covalent bonds are what join one water molecule together. Water is actually able to then form hydrogen bonds between itself and another water molecule. Nope, I'll keep this up here. That happens because of that polarity we've just spoken about. So the polarity of the molecule means that our hydrogen atom on one molecule of water is attracted to the oxygen atom on another water molecule. So it's that positive and negative attractions, opposites attract. So our hydrogen bonds start to form between that negative oxygen of one water molecule and our positive hydrogen atom on our other water molecule. And this is how lots of water molecules join together. So technically, every molecule of water could have, for one molecule of water, it could have three sets of hydrogen bonds on it, bonding to three other molecules of water. So yeah, water has a lot of interesting properties and a lot of interesting uses because of this polarity. And because of this polarity, it allows this really strong attraction of hydrogen bonds to form between the negative oxygen and the positive hydrogen of two separate water molecules. So the structure of water really affects its property because of its structure, because of its polarity. It has a really, really high heat capacity. Also has a large latent heat of vaporization, which we'll look into a little bit more. They're two things that you'll have visited and spoken about at GCSE physics, so heat capacity and latent heat of vaporization. We have strong cohesion between water molecules, which is a sort of a new concept, but it's all to do with its polarity. It's all to do with various electrochemical forces, the idea of positive and negatives attracting. It's an important solvent, and it's a metabolite in many metabolic reactions. So we're going to look at the high heat capacity of water first. So it has a high latent, no, it doesn't have a high latent, it does, but it has a high latent heat of vaporization, but it also has a high heat capacity. So we're going to go through the definition of specific heat capacity again. So that is something that you'll learn at GCSE in physics. And specific heat capacity is the heat that is needed to raise the temperature of 1 kilogram of water by 1 degree Celsius. So that is how much heat is required. And water has a very, very high heat capacity. So it takes a long time to heat, but it also takes a very long time to cool down. So water has a large specific heat capacity, so therefore it can absorb large amounts of heat energy before its temperature actually starts to rise a significant amount. That's actually really useful. If you think about the human body and the amount of reactions that are going on inside the body, the temperature of a human body could increase a lot if water had a very low specific heat capacity. Because it's high specific heat capacity, actually what happens is that amount of water, that specific heat, that amount of heat energy that it can take in before its temperature actually rises is actually really, really huge. So that's really, really good if you think about how many metabolic reactions are happening inside our bodies, how much energy is actually being converted and being produced in certain areas of our body. Our bodies would actually end up heating up a lot, a bit like a mobile phone when we charge them and they start to overheat sometimes. That would happen to our bodies if our bodies didn't have this high heat capacity. Well, if the water in our bodies didn't have this high heat capacity. So that's really, really important. And it's one of the reasons water is such an important molecule. So again, the importance of this to living organisms, the bodies of living organisms are mostly made of water. So this water in and around our cells absorbs a lot of heat without its temperature increasing much. So what basically happens is our water in our bodies act as a buffer to those heat changes. So when we're having lots of different reactions taking place, such as respiration or in a plant photosynthesis, it helps because we're not having, it buffers from any heat changes that might occur due to the increase in energy in certain areas of the body. It's also an advantage for aquatic organisms as large bodies of water, so like seas or lakes, so they do not change temperatures as quickly as terrestrial environments. So it's really useful for aquatic organisms because they're large bodies of water, they don't change temperatures quickly, so actually it allows them to sort of maintain a constant temperature because it takes a long time for them to change. It's one of the reasons why the sun can be outside, the sun can be really, really bright, it's really, really hot outside, you have your feet on sand, the sun's really, really hot, you go into the water and the water's not as hot, it has a different temperature even though the air temperature is the same, and it's all about this specific heat capacity. Linking on to specific heat capacity of water, we also have a large latent heat of vaporization. So in a body of water, some molecules of water are moving at faster speeds, so they have higher kinetic energy. Some have enough kinetic energy to escape the water moving into the air, so this is evaporation. So high latent heat of vaporization, or latent heat of vaporization, we would define that as the amount of energy needed to change 1 gram of liquid to 1 gram of gas. Okay, so it requires a lot of energy to break bonds in water. So lots of energy is used up when water evaporates. So this is actually really useful. So when these fast moving molecules evaporate, their energy goes with them. leading to the average kinetic energy of the water to decrease. This means the water cools down, and the energy that is lost is called the latent heat of vaporization. So that's the heat that we have lost due to the water evaporating off our bodies. You can see then actually how this is really, really useful. This is great because of things like sweating. It's how sweating works. It's how it's actually a cooling mechanism. So the idea is, as our body heats up, some of the water molecules inside our body are going to have faster speeds. So they're going to have a higher kinetic energy. Some of the water in our body when we're exercising, for example, or if it's just a really hot day, will have enough kinetic energy to escape the water moving into the air, called evaporation. So it moves through our skin, turns into sweat, and then obviously from the sweat we have evaporation start to form, and because that water on our skin starts to heat up enough that it can evaporate. So when these fast moving molecules evaporate, the energy goes with them, so it leads to the average kinetic energy of water decreasing. So the water cools down, our body will eventually cool down. So this is really, really useful things for organisms because it can be used to cool us down when sweating, and it also means that we can cool down from sweating without losing too much water. We're not actually needing our body to lose tons of water to cool down, we're just needing to lose a little bit. It's important to living organisms. So animals are able to sweat and keep cool as the water in sweat evaporates off the surface of the animal. Also really good for plants. So plants are also cooled when water evaporates from their leaves. A topic later on in A-level biology is all about transpiration and evaporation and xylem and phloem and capillary reaction. And what you'll find is lots of the information from here in this lesson about water sort of repeats itself later on when we do those parts about the plant. So it's quite good to sort of make a note almost now to say, oh, this will actually get revisited at some point. What you will start to do is, once we've gone past this biological molecules topic, is you'll start to notice that actually lots of the new topics that we come to link back to this, link back to something biological molecules. And the reason that in AQA they teach it as a unit by itself is actually having a really good core understanding of these biological molecules helps understand the more complex matters later on. So these are really important sections actually to have some really good, nice, strong notes on, because when we get into things like the nervous system, and we're talking about sodium, potassium, ion pumps, or we're talking about digestion, we'll be going back to lots of these molecules. So having this good, strong understanding of the molecules and how they work and how hydrolysis works and how condensation reactions work is actually really key to then being able to fully understand the later topics and then fully access all those marks to the later topics. So in the exam, you can get questions that are quite specifically about biological molecules, but actually what you'll find is this is more interwoven and interspersed with the other topics, because these are like a nice grounding to sort of start you off. So cohesion, so going back to water, water has strong cohesion between water molecules. So because they are polar, water molecules are really, really strongly attracted to each other, and they form those hydrogen bonds, which we talked about at the beginning. So we form those hydrogen bonds between the positive hydrogen and the negative oxygen of different water molecules. So we call this cohesion. So this linking due to the hydrogen bonds, due to the polarity, we call it cohesion. And what this does, this cohesion produces surface tension when water meets the air. So these hydrogen bonds help hold water together. So it creates this surface tension so they can flow as a continuous stream. So we call this mass flow. So for example, if water coming out of a tap means that actually we have this mass flow of the water all coming out together. We have a cohesion with it. They're all linked together. They're all coming out together rather than it just sort of splaying out everywhere. So we have this really nice cohesion with water and it all joins together. Why is it important? Well, actually, another thing that this cohesion does is water forms droplets when we place it on a dry surface. So if you drop a bit of water on a table, it forms a droplet rather than being flattened out by gravity. And that's that whole idea of surface tension, and we'll look at why that's interesting now. So water cohesion leads to surface tension, and it makes water behave as if there's this skin where the water meets the air. So that's what I was saying about that droplet. So it doesn't actually spread out due to the force of gravity. It actually stays together, and that's because of that cohesion, because of all those hydrogen bonds between the different water molecules. It's so cohesive, and they're pulling each other together, and it's such strong attractive forces. They don't spread out due to gravity, they don't flatten due to gravity, they stay as a droplet. Again, that's really useful for things like small animals such as water hoppers and water boatmen, as this allows small animals to live on the surface of water bodies, and actually they can walk on water, and because of the surface tension and because of their pressure and surface area distribution, they are able to actually walk on top of the water. But technically their limbs do go slightly into the water, but they don't swim, and they're able to actually cross on top of the water. There is also some spiders called fishing spiders, and they're able to do something quite similar, and it's all to do with the surface tension of the water and then the pressure and surface area of the limbs of the animals. And that's really, really interesting. It gives them a whole actual different niche to be able to hunt and live for organisms. So it opens up a whole sort of different area. Obviously for us, we don't have that ability because in water, because of issues with density and such. But another thing, again, linking to plants, which is a section that we'll come back to later on, is in plants, water moves up the xylem vessels as a continuous stream. And this allows water to move from the roots to the top of the tallest trees. And we call this water transport in plants. And that is all to do with this cohesive movement of the water molecules that causes this continuous stream we call, again, mass flow. So this is a whole topic of its own later on. So the happier you are with water, the easier that topic becomes as well. But it's really nice the way that water works, because it has this cohesive property. It means it's actually really good for transporting around different organisms. Water is also an important solvent. So a solvent, as you should know, is a liquid that other substances called solutes can dissolve in. So the positive and negative charges of water attract other molecules, causing them to separate from each other. So they dissolve. When substances are dissolved in water, they are free to move around and react with other molecules. So ions and polar molecules can easily dissolve in water. The positive ends of water attracts negative ions, and the negative ends of water attract the positive ions. Why is this really important? Well, actually, this is really important for things like metabolic reactions. Metabolic reactions are happening inside all living organisms, and they can only happen when the reactants are dissolved in water. That's generally because lots of metabolic reactions involve lots of different ions and lots of different polar molecules. So substances being dissolved in water also allows them to be transported around the body of living organisms. So for example, glucose, carbon dioxide, urea and blood plasma, mineral ions and sugars, they're dissolved in water and they're transported in the xylem and phloem in plants. So actually, because water has these cohesive properties, they're great for transporting other molecules around the body. So when we break down glucose, we've got carbon dioxide in our blood, urea in our blood plasma, they travel around really nicely in our blood plasma through this cohesive model. And similarly, mineral ions and sugars work in the same way in plants through the xylem and the phloem. So finally, just on water, water is a metabolite. So it's really good. It's actually a really good metabolite. So water molecules can also be involved in chemical reactions directly. So we've actually said that water molecules, we can use them here because of so many reactions happening. These reactions need to happen in water because it's a good solvent. It can actually be used as part of that chemical reaction directly itself. So if a chemical reaction involves a condensation reaction, or a hydrolysis reaction, water is involved. So obviously, as we know, if we've got a large molecule and we want to break it down into a smaller molecule, we go through a hydrolysis reaction. So we add water into that molecule, it breaks it down into a smaller molecule. If we're wanting to join the smaller molecules together to make a larger molecule, we'll go for a condensation reaction and water is released. So it's also a good metabolite as well. Why is this useful? Well, hydrolysis reactions are important in digestion of large molecules in animals. We've talked about lots of hydrolysis reactions for molecules such as carbohydrates, lipids, proteins. Condensation reactions are actually really important in synthesis of important molecules such as our proteins in living organisms, and we'll look in them in a bit more detail again when we come back to proteins again. So proteins keep coming up all the time. So let's get rid of that and let's go on to inorganic ions. So here we go. Oh, I need to share this actually, I've just realised. Escape that. Screen share. Why is this not sharing? Here we go. So we're going to have a look at some inorganic ions now. So inorganic ions are ions that do not contain carbon atoms. So anything that's inorganic does not contain carbon atoms. So when you carry on with A-level chemistry and you're going to topics that are organic chemistry and inorganic chemistry, organic chemistry is all about your molecules that contain carbon, and inorganic chemistry is all about your molecules that do not contain carbon. Inorganic ions are obviously charged atoms. So phosphate ions are found in a biological molecule when a phosphoric acid molecule has been bonded to another molecule. And actually, ions in living organisms, we have lots of them and we gain them through nutrition. And they're found in the cytoplasm and body fluids, and they're used to maintain optimum levels of each ion. So some ions we find in our body in really, really huge, high concentrations, and that's fine. While others would be toxic if they were increased to those different values. So we actually have a really, homeostasis is really important in actually maintaining our inorganic ion levels in our body. So things like sodium and potassium, if they increase or decrease too low, it can have a massive effect on the whole body. This whole idea of negative feedback and homeostasis, really maintaining those correct ion balances. So what is happening here? ATP. So ATP isn't actually an inorganic ion. ATP is a nucleotide. It's a nucleotide derivative, and this is sort of our little sidestep into nucleotides, and then we'll sidestep back into inorganic ions. So this is ATP. Actually, ATP, which stands for adenosine triose phosphate, looks very similar, and hence why we call it a nucleotide derivative, to a nucleotide of RNA or a nucleotide of DNA, and specifically RNA because we've got a ribose sugar. So we've got adenine, which is bonded to ribose, and then 3 phosphate groups. Obviously, when we're dealing with RNA, it's just a ribose sugar and 1 phosphate group. Here we've got adenine and 3 phosphate groups. So ATP is a really small and simple molecule, and it is the primary energy currency of cells. It powers most cellular reactions. So it's this currency that is really, really needed. So any further on that we go with any cellular reactions, it will be ATP. So when in the past, when you've seen like energy written in brackets, now we're actually starting to think about, well, ATP is this currency of energy. So I'll explain it a bit more now. So ATP is our universal energy currency. So ATP, what it does, oh, I want to get a blank page actually to go through this bit. Let's get that up. I want my pen. Annotate, draw. Okay, so ATP. ATP does a lot of different things, but it's this currency. It's this currency of our cells for most cellular reactions. So we can have hydrolysis of ATP. So I'm going to just pop hydrolysis here. Hydrolysis of ATP. So again, it's this idea of hydrolysis, condensation reactions. It comes around again. So hydrolysis of ATP. So if we have an ATP molecule, which we've got here, and we add water to it, what we get is we make ADP, which is adenosine diphosphate, plus PI. PI is an inorganic phosphate group, so it's a phosphate group without any carbon, plus energy. And this is our official equation for this. So what happens is adenosine triphosphate, so ATP, becomes adenosine diphosphate plus an inorganic an inorganic phosphate group, PI. This happens by an enzyme called ATP hydrolase. And this uses a water molecule. So we get some water, ATP hydrolase catalyzes this reaction. It breaks ATP down with the water molecule to form ADP plus PI plus energy. So energy is released during hydrolysis of ATP as one of the phosphate bonds is broken. So what happens is, if you see here, we call it ADP plus PI. Basically what's happening during ATP hydrolysis of ATP, breaking one of these phosphate bonds here. So then it becomes ADP. So instead of ATP for the triose, we have ADP for diphosphate. So it's them precursors again to our words, monomers, polymers. We've got mono, di, tri. It's all going to give us a clue of how many of everything there is. So yeah, it becomes ATP. ATP becomes ADP, sorry. And when we break in this bond of the phosphate bonds, we have this release of energy happening here. And that's really, really good. We have this release of energy, and that's great. What can actually happen is we can have something called energy coupling. I'm just going to rub this off here so we can talk about energy coupling. So when we break this bond, we have that. Get something also called energy coupling. Energy coupling. Energy coupling. So energy coupling is when the hydrolysis of ATP can be coupled to other reactions in the cell that need energy. So basically, we said that ATP is this currency of cells. It's what's required for us to be able to power most cellular reactions. So if we have certain reactions in our cells that are going to always constantly require ATP, they're going to, maybe the reactions are going to be actually happening a lot, we can actually couple the hydrolysis of ATP with these other reactions. So energy coupling is hydrolysis of ATP being coupled with other cellular reactions that need energy. So the example I'm going to give you, you don't need to know in lots of detail now. It's something that, again, will come up later on. But what we have is, I'm just going to draw it over here, actually. In our membrane, in our cell membrane, we have different transport proteins, we have different pumps to let different molecules in and out. And don't worry too much about that now, because when we carry on talking about eukaryotic cells, we'll eventually get onto a whole section about cell membrane. Basically, our cell membrane is interspersed with like carrier proteins that look like a bit like this, and we can also have pumps. So one pump that we can get is called a transmembrane sodium potassium pump. Oops. Sodium potassium pump. So what happens is, for these pumps are able to either let sodium in or let potassium in, and so they have to change. So they go through something called a conformational change. So the shape changes, and they change shape and move, a little bit like when we were saying the active site during induced fit reaction, that it's able to change shape slightly. So what happens here is energy is released from hydrolysis of ATP. So what we've gone and done is we've actually coupled hydrolysis of ATP with the transmembrane sodium potassium pumps. So what happens here is we draw it like this. We'd have ATP to ADP plus PI, and we'll always, sometimes you get like a little jaggedy box and it says energy. And it's energy is released from hydrolysis of ATP. This energy is needed to power this pump that drives sodium, Na+, out of a cell, and it allows potassium into the pump. Now, you don't need to worry about this in too much detail right now. This is involved a lot in action potentials and the nervous system, which is actually A2. But it gives you an idea of how this works. So because this pump requires energy, it's basically like a form of active transport. Because it requires energy, we couple where hydrolysis of ATP happens with this transmembrane pump, just to allow it to happen a lot more smoothly, and because we need a constant supply of energy there. So the other thing, let me just clear a little bit of space on here now. Let me just save that image and clear all drawings. So the other thing that we need sometimes is, that can happen, is phosphorylation. So let me just pop that here. Phosphorylation. So the inorganic phosphate that we break off, so we have hydrolysis of ATP, so let's pop that in again. So we've got our ATP plus H2O becomes ADP plus PI plus energy in brackets. We obviously have this phosphate, this inorganic phosphate now that's loose. This inorganic phosphate, so our PI is able to phosphorylate other compounds. So PI is able to phosphorylate other compounds, able to phosphorylate other compounds. And this is actually really useful. So as well as us releasing ADP and the energy, which is the really important part, this phosphate can actually go along and phosphorylate other compounds. Phosphorylating other compounds is really useful because what it does is it makes, it makes them more reactive, So that helps for any other further reactions that might need to go on later. Again, A2, you'll start looking at things like Krebs cycle and glycolysis and electron chains, and they all have lots of phosphorylation start to take place. But it's just good to know now that that inorganic phosphate that we release can actually then be used for something else as well. So we've broken down ATP through hydrolysis to make ADP plus PI plus energy. Now we are also able to resynthesize ATP. So we can have the resynthesis of ATP. the reaction for this is just the opposite. ADP plus PI plus energy goes to ATP plus water. Okay, so basically, as you can see, is if we've got this addition of water being happening here, this is a condensation reaction. So we have condensation of ADP and PI. So it's a condensation reaction here. This reaction is again catalyzed by another enzyme. So this one is catalyzed by ATP synthase. ATP synthase. And this happens, I'm just going to pop it here, this happens regularly during photosynthesis and respiration. And basically that's just because in photosynthesis and respiration we need a lot of energy. And then what happens is we make this ADP and PI and we want some more ATP. So it's just a recycling process of the ATP. The ATP gets broken down, we use the energy that's been released from breaking off that phosphate, and then we rejoin them together using condensation reaction. And it's just this nice cycle where they get recycled again and again and again. So again, that is useful if you think about the coupling of this with another reaction inside the cell, because it means that actually it doesn't have to travel far for more ATP to be made. And then that ATP can break down and it just basically cycles where it's at. So it's really actually quite nice and neat and clever. So finally, we'll pop back now to our inorganic ions. And have a little look at them, if I can get my mouse to work. Okay, so inorganic ions occur in solutions in our cytoplasm and body fluids of organisms. Some are in high concentrations, like I said before, and others are in low concentration. Phosphate ions are components of both DNA and ATP. And so we're going to describe the specific roles of three more inorganic ions. So we've just looked at phosphate ions. What we're going to look at now, oops. I don't know where all the stuff's gone that I want. Right. Let me give up on that, because I've lost where I need it to be. Hemoglobin. I do want hemoglobin because I want iron. Let me just get a separate page because I don't know where half of it is. Let's open up whiteboard. So screen sharing on a new share. I want whiteboard share. Okay, so finally, inorganic ions. We can talk about hydrogen ions, iron ions, and sodium ions. So hydrogen ions. Hydrogen ions, obviously, you know them as the symbol being H+. These are inorganic ions because they do not contain carbon, and they are made up just of protons, so they're composed only of protons. pH values, so hydrogen ions and pH values have a really close relationship. So pH values, they actually represent the concentration of hydrogen ions in a solution. So pH values, they represent in a solution. Now, what's also really clever is our mitochondria. So mitochondria and hydrogen ions have a really special relationship. So mitochondria are actually they're able to gather up and save and accumulate hydrogen ions, and they save these up in the intermembrane space. And again, next session, when we talk about eukaryotic cells and organelles, we'll look into mitochondria a bit more about their structure and shape and work out what this intermembrane space is. But basically between the membranes, they have an intermembrane space. Intermembrane space, and they accumulate hydrogen ions and they store them in this intermembrane space. Why they do this? Well, they do this to allow anaerobic respiration to take place. So if we think about anaerobic respiration, mitochondria is the site of respiration. It's the site of aerobic respiration. It's the site of anaerobic respiration. If anaerobic respiration is to go ahead, basically we need this influx of hydrogen ions present there as well. So they store them there so that if anaerobic respiration does need to take place, we've got this store of hydrogen ions to help it. Iron ions, which are quite hard to say actually. Let's save that. Let's go next page. Iron ions. So let's look at these iron ions. These are Fe2+. The main part of iron that we need to know about is that they are an important part of the heme group. Heme, you can probably think where heme comes from, is part of hemoglobin. So hemoglobin is obviously found in red blood cells, and hemoglobin allows our red blood cells, allows RBC, red blood cells, to transport oxygen and carbon dioxide around the body. So the heme group of hemoglobin allows red blood cells to transport CO2 and O2 around the body. We don't need to know too much more about iron ions than that, other than that they're Fe2+, they're in the heme, we find them in the heme group of hemoglobin, and they allow our red blood cells to transport carbon dioxide and oxygen around our body. And then our very last bit for today is sodium ions, and what you'll start to see is sodium ions come up loads in cellular reactions. You'll also find calcium ions involved a lot, as well as potassium, but sodium ions are ones that come up and occur loads. So sodium ions are Na+. This is involved, sodium ions are involved in loads and loads of transmembrane reactions, lots of reactions going across membranes, and they're really, really interesting actually. But one of the main ones is actually to do with digestion. So what sodium ions are able to do is, when sodium ions are transported across the cell membrane of the intestines, so when they're transported across the cell membrane in the intestines, it allows, so what it does is it allows co-transport of glucose and amino acids. So again, this is a topic that we will cover in first year of biology, so we'll look at that a bit later on. I'm not quite sure. So this is topic 1 we're on, that's topic 6. No, digestion is a topic 6. I could be making this up. Digestion, I think, is nervous communication, receptors, control of heart rate. Topic 5. So when we get to topic 5, it will include this bit. And yeah, so it involve all about these co-transports of glucose and amino acids. So basically sodium's, again, it controls lots of these pumps that move things in and out. So where we are is we've now finished the biological molecules topic. So that's topic 1A and 1B. So topic 1A, 1B is biological molecules, biological molecules. And this consists of the topics of carbohydrates, lipids, proteins, enzymes, and for the enzymes, that involves their action, their factors affecting enzymes, factors affecting, and also enzyme controlled reactions. Controlled reactions. So they were all in the enzymes lesson. Control reactions also includes DNA and RNA. DNA and RNA. It includes DNA replication, water, ATP, and inorganic ions. So that is our first topic which we have covered. So that is absolutely everything that should be covered in topic 1, 1A and 1B. 1A is biological molecules, which goes to enzymes. I don't know why they split them into 1A and 1B. So that's 1A, biological molecules, and then 1B is more biological molecules. Don't really know why they split them like that. Then we're going on to topic 2. Topic 2 is divided into 3 sections. So I'm going to have a quick chat to you now about the sections of topic 2. So we'll start that tomorrow. So you sort of get an idea of where we're going with topic 2. So topic 2 is all about the cell. So topic 2 is cell. And specifically, we'll start with topic 2A. And we'll start with eukaryotic cells, and organelles. Now that seems quite a simple task and simple place to start, but basically very similar to chemistry when we were talking about the energy levels and the subshells and the orbitals. Eukaryotic cells actually have loads more organelles in there than what we've talked about in the past at GCSE. And then unsurprisingly, we do prokaryotic cells, and they are the same issue. We've got loads more organelles in them than we've talked about. So we've got prokaryotic cells, and we also look at viruses again. Then we will do an analysis of cell components. Then we look at cell division. So mitosis, which is nice because, hang on, part of cell division is DNA replication. So we can start using some of topic 1 in there with it again. And then we have cell division investigating mitosis. And again, lots of topic 1 starts to appear. So in eukaryotic cells and organelles, we start talking about mitochondria. So we start bringing in inorganic ions again. Topic 2B, I will just give you a quick run through of topic 2 actually, so you've got an idea of where we're actually going with this. So topic 2B is cell membranes. So this is a whole topic on cell membranes. Well, it's a subtopic of cells, but whole subtopic on cell membranes. So cell membranes, which we'll basically won't really do much of next week. So we'll go, here's a eukaryotic cell. Here's all its organelles. It has a cell membrane, and we won't really do much more about cell membrane because it's actually really, really complex. We simplify it loads at GCSE because it's really, really complex. So we will do its structure in detail. We will talk about exchanges across cell membranes. So then we will cover diffusion, we'll cover osmosis, we will cover active transport, and actually in there as well we will also look at a couple of other things called exocytosis and endocytosis. So we'll have exocytosis and we'll also have endocytosis. So again, these are all things that we sort of have, apart from cell membrane structure, which will be basically a new thing completely. You'll have some sort of understanding of, and these two which are new, you'll have some sort of understanding of the other three, and we're just making them a little bit more complex and in a little bit more detail. And then finally for topic 2, we do topic 2C. And so this is cells and immune system. So we'll look at the immune system, immunity and vaccines, antibodies in medicine, interpreting vaccine and antibody data. So I'm going to just pop in here data analysis of those two. And then finally, HIV and viruses. HIV and viruses, well, we've actually already spoken about viruses a bit in A-level. And then GCSE, you've covered HIV in small detail, and then we go into it in a lot more detail at A-level. So yeah, so that's probably the next. We've done a month and we've got topic 1 done. So probably next month and a half for topic 2 and where we're going. So it's giving you sort of an overview of where we're sort of going and where we're planning to. So if you want to sort of read around, that's sort of where we're heading towards. What I will do is I will send over sort of an end of topic set of questions that you can sort of look at and work through in your own time for biological molecules. And I will probably keep coming back every time we do something where it involves biological molecules. Go, oh yeah, we talked about this in topic 1, and it's good to sort of keep up on topic 1, because it's something we come back to all the time. And yeah, and so then first year it's topic 1, topic 2. We also have a topic 3, which is exchange and transport systems, and then we have a topic 4, and then second year is topic 5, topic 8. So fab. I will start topic 2 with you tomorrow, and we will start looking at eukaryotic cells and their organelles tomorrow. So yeah, I will see you at